talking about the art of the interview. We're going to talk about the second advisory, which is avoiding the trap. Do you have any questions for me? Why is that a trap? And by the way, it's not just true coming out of college or the first job. When we interview people for CEOs or when boards of directors interview CEO candidates,
absolutely,
they will ask invariably, so what questions do you have for us? Why is it a trap there? Though maybe it's unexpected, but what do you think the mindset is of someone being asked, do you have any questions for me?
Anytime you go into an interview, your anticipation is that you're going to be answering questions. And so it's a trap because it's the point in the interview where you actually take control of where the direction of the content is going to head. That's why I think it's a trap, because people spend a lot of time preparing and thinking about how they're going to answer questions that are being asked of them. And then when the tables turn a little bit and you're not anticipating it, all of a sudden you're in control of the interview and you're the one asking the questions.
The other thing is the psychology. Sometimes, especially people earlier in their career, they think, oh, the interviewer is just being a nice person.
It's a courtesy.
Right, it's a courtesy. And you feel like you're perhaps privileged being there in the interview and you say, no, I'm good.
I'm fine. I've learned everything.
So if someone is interviewing with you and says, no, I'm fine, I don't have any questions, what's your reaction as the interviewer?
My gut reaction is usually twofold. One is, I honestly can't believe that you have no questions for me. So that's the first reaction, is sort of one of shock. But the reason it's one of shock is because the questions that people ask during this piece of the interview process tell more about their interest in the opportunity and their preparation for this particular interview than any other aspect of the interview.
That is so important. The way people are described after the interview, how often have we heard, she asked the best questions?
Absolutely. Or candidly, she asked no questions, and it really makes me wonder whether or not she's even interested in the job at all.
So asking really good questions is critical to do well in an interview.
Critical.
Right? And they don't have to be done on the fly.
No, you can absolutely prepare for them. When I think about preparing for this particular segment of the interview, I always encourage people to think about questions in 4 different buckets. One is, think about the broad industry. So do you have any questions about the broad industry of the organization that you're interviewing at? If you're interviewing for a job at Spencer Stuart, what are some questions that you can come up with that have to do with the executive search industry? The second bucket is to think about the specific company. What specific questions do you have about Spencer Stuart specifically? Not about any of our competitors. That would fall into that first bucket with regards to the broader industry. But what questions about Spencer Stuart specifically, about our culture, about the way we work, about how many people work in this organization, whatever it might be, but specific questions to the organization. The third bucket is specific questions to the role and responsibilities of what you are actually interviewing for. And then the fourth, and sometimes an overlooked component of this, is about the person who's interviewing you. And that's a really critical one to think about, because most often when you're interviewing for a job, you're going to have more than one interview. So I'll give you a very specific example, especially relative to the last one. I interview a lot of people at Spencer Stuart for the analyst role. I joined Spencer Stuart as an analyst. And so I'm always really surprised when at the end of an interview, someone doesn't say, tell me about your experience as an analyst, or you've been in this position before, as I understand. What are some of the critical things that you found that made you successful in this role? Or I see that you've progressed from analyst to senior associate. How did you actually go about doing that? All it takes is knowing that I started my career at Spencer Stuart as an analyst to recognize that I specifically have held the job that you're interviewing for. And I'm always shocked when people don't ask questions of me that actually draw out some of my knowledge of the specific role.
The fact is, people love talking about themselves. And even if you don't know who you're going to interview before, and oftentimes you do, and you can do a Google search, you can do a LinkedIn search, you get clues about them and then ask. But even if you don't, you can certainly say, can you just briefly tell me your story? How did you come into this organization? How did you progress? And that gives you the clues to ask those follow-ups.
It's a great point. And you make another really good point there, which is it's 2016 and most people have an external profile of some sort. Most people do have a LinkedIn profile or some sort of presence, perhaps a biography on the company website. So there's usually a way to get some insight into who the individual is that you're going to be spending 60 to 90 minutes with. And one of those things can even be not about their professional career, but maybe you learn something about them personally by doing some of that research too. If I'm interviewing and I recognize that someone else is an alum of the same university that I went to, or perhaps they grew up in the same town that my best friend did, you can find ways to make some personal connection with people that way too. And as we've talked about before, making a personal connection is always a really important thing to do when you're interviewing.